As an anthropologist, I'm fascinated by what brought you here to this moment, to being a self-identified social entrepreneur. How did this happen to you? Did you hear the call or the Twitter? Is there a gene? Was it something you read or a film you saw before the age of 16? Did you know you were one before you could admit it to your parents? Perhaps it was the lure of travel and work in faraway places to meet people whose lives and values and needs seemed somehow more real than your own. Along your individual journey to this moment, did anyone happen to mention that you were going to have to work harder than you could possibly have ever imagined? There's something about a gathering of social entrepreneurs which reminds me of the crews that were recruited in the 19th and early 20th century for expeditions. Your work reminds me of the advertisement that Sir Ernest Shackleton placed in the London Times in 1907 when he was looking for a crew to sail with him to the South Pole. Wanted, men for hazardous journey, low wages, bitter cold, long hours of complete darkness, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in the event of success. He once gave preference to orphans because he felt that if they were lost, there would be no parents to mind. Whatever force or person or impulse that brought you to social entrepreneurship, whatever it was, did anyone ever happen to mention that there might not be enough resources to do what had become your life's work? That some part of you would always be trying to strike the right balance between inspiration and bookkeeping, between being in the field and being at home, finding the time to write, to read, to stay focused, to let go? An outsider trying to figure out who you are, what common traits or origins or patterns might truly define a social entrepreneur, might do well to begin by saying there is an irresistible imprinting which compels you to come to the same geographical latitude, this place, at the same moment of seasonal change, say the last week of March, every year. And for whatever reasons, I'm grateful that we're in this particular room, the Sheldonian Theater. In 1664, when Christopher Wren designed the Sheldonian, it was a complete break from the Gothic architecture of the past. The building was based on Serlio's engraving of the D-shaped Circus of Marcellus, Theater of Marcellus in Rome from the 1st century AD. The Roman building had no roof, but it did have a temporary awning which was brought out when required by weather. The brilliant solution Wren used was a geometrical, flat floor roof, a series of trusses which are held in place by their own weight. The roof above us was declared an architectural wonder, and for many years it was the largest unsupported floor in existence. It was judged so successful and strong that the university press, the OUP, has at times used it for storing thousands of books. It is, I am happy to report, inspected about every 100 years. The painting on the ceiling was done by Charles II's court painter, Robert Streeter, and the allegorical story depicted shows truth descending upon the arts and sciences and expelling ignorance from the university. The Sheldonian is used for awarding honorary degrees. The first honorary degree given by the university, some say any university, was awarded to Lionel Woodville in 1479. Degrees were used by the university as an attempt to honor and obtain the favor or influence of men with great power. Woodville was the brother-in-law of the king, Edward IV. The insignia, as it is called, is the university's annual honorary degree giving ceremony. Degrees are awarded to leading figures from arts, politics, science, and business. Etiquette demands that the recipients of honorary degrees remain silent. Honorary degrees have gone to just about every great, powerful person. Queen Elizabeth I came here 4 times because she loved giving them to her favorite men. Tsar Alexander I, after the Napoleonic Wars, received an honorary degree. Benjamin Franklin, Mark Twain, Rudyard Kipling, 21 of the 23 British prime ministers who attended Oxford University as students have been given honorary degrees in this room, with the exception of Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair. They've been awarded to Nelson Mandela, to Jimmy Carter, to Bill Clinton, to Václav Havel. One of the degrees went to a Russian poet, a woman called Anna Akhmatova. Her first book of poetry was published when she was in her early 20s and was an immediate success and was reprinted 13 times. Young people learned her verses, and Prokofiev set the lyrics to music. She was startlingly beautiful. At 5 feet 11 inches, tall, dark hair, lithe and feline, her green eyes were compared to those of a snow leopard. Poems were written about her, and she helped launch a new poetic movement in Russia that called for clarity and restraint. She was 28 years old at the time of the 1917 Russian Revolution. She was 32 when Stalin arrested her husband on charges of plotting against the government. From 1925 to 1940, there was a ban on the publication of all of her poetry. In 1935, married again, her husband, an art critic and historian of Western art, was arrested and sent to the Siberian prison where he later died. She began work on her most famous poem, Requiem, dedicated to the times in which she lived. It was written between 1935 and 1940, but it wasn't allowed to be published in Russia until 1987. Akhmatova's friend, Nadezhda Mandelstam, described it well. We all belong to the same category marked down for absolute destruction. The astonishing thing is not that so many of us went to concentration camps or died there, but that some of us survived. Caution did not help. Only chance could save you. Akhmatova was terribly poor, unable to publish her poems. She had no means of earning a living. She lived mainly on a diet of black bread and sugarless tea. During a period when a poem on a scrap of paper could warrant a death sentence, to write meant an absolute certainty about the importance and significance of poetry. The poems of Requiem, composed at this time, were learnt by heart by friends, committed to memory as she recited them. Her friends remember going out late at night into the empty streets, repeating the poems over and over, terrified they would forget a word or get something wrong. She was extremely thin and frequently ill. In March 1938, Akhmatova's son, Lev, was arrested and for 17 months was kept in prison in Leningrad. The only crime was being the child of his parents. She would get up from bed and go stand, sometimes in freezing weather, in the long lines of people waiting outside the prisons. When it was your turn, you would say the name of the prisoner, and then after what could be a very long wait, a voice would say, dead, sick, unknown, or sometimes sentenced to 10 years without the right of correspondence, which was the euphemism for executed by firing squad. She described it herself. I spent 17 months standing in prison lines in Leningrad. One day, somebody recognized me. There, standing behind me, was a woman with blue lips. She suddenly came out of her stupor, so common to us all, and whispered in my ear. Everybody then spoke in whispers. Can you put this into words? Can you describe this? And I said, yes, I can. And then a fleeting smile passed over what had once been her face. A message reached Akhmatova that Stalin might be willing to spare her son if she wrote a poem praising him. She wrote it, and her son was sentenced to death. But then those who sentenced him were purged. They were shot, and his sentence commuted to exile. She had been more or less in continual disfavor since 1925, and many in Russia believed that she was long dead or perished, along with the other poets and intellectuals and artists. In fact, in 1941, during the siege of Leningrad, Akhmatova was evacuated to Tashkent. And there she began writing Poem Without a Hero. It was a 32-year project. She returned to Leningrad after the war, where her popularity was immense. She was once again denounced by Stalin, and accused of poisoning the minds of Soviets. She was called by Stalin half a nun and half a harlot. No publication was allowed. In 1956, her son was released from the prison camps, and nearly 10 years later, it was decided that she could be allowed to travel abroad, and it was to Oxford, to this place, to the Sheldonian Theater that she came. In the spring of 1965, preparations were made for Akhmatova to go to England to receive the Honorary D.Lit, Doctor of Literature, conferred upon her by the University of Oxford. She was told by her doctors that due to her serious heart condition, it would be too risky to travel by plane. She decided to brave the journey by boat and train. She was frightened that her health was not up to it, but there was never any question of not coming. When she reached Dover, despite the fact that she had an entry visa, the English immigration officer demanded a letter of invitation as well. At the Sheldonian Theater, wearing the scarlet gown of a doctor of literature, standing in silence, dressed in black, she advanced slowly on the arm of a young companion. She was required to climb a high staircase when they awarded her the degree. It's just behind this partition. But she was too weak. At that moment, the university broke a long-standing tradition, and it was not Akhmatova who ascended the staircase, but the leaders of the university who descended to her. She returned to Russia and died less than a year later on the 5th of March. Her body was taken to the Cathedral of St. Nicholas the Seafarer, and the church was mobbed. Crowds of people, thousands of people who were trying to see her for the last time, or in the case of many of the young, see her for the first. Her friend, another great poet, Joseph Brodsky, said, "At certain periods of history, only poetry is capable of dealing with reality by condensing it into something graspable, something that otherwise couldn't be retained by the mind. Her popularity enabled her to speak for the nation as well as to tell it something it didn't know." The Leningrad studio of documentary films recorded the entire funeral. Shortly afterwards, the film was confiscated, and the people who made it demoted and disappeared. I believe that what drove her forward and sustained her under the most terrible conditions, at times living like a beast, unable to count upon food or shelter, in constant danger, was the need to find and express the truth. These were the truths that she found by bearing witness. In a now famous document called the Minnesota Declaration, the filmmaker Werner Herzog speaks of what he describes as the ecstatic truth, which is mysterious, elusive, and can only be reached through the imagination. Facts, he declared, facts are for accountants. This other truth, the ecstatic truth, so evident in Akhmatova's poems, speaks of the subjective inner world experience, and it is, by its very nature, transformative. The philosopher Isaiah Berlin was with Akhmatova that day in this room, and what he later said, he learned from her, how he described her, might be a description of your work, and perhaps of you. A formulator who, by means of his or her tool, in Akhmatova's case, the word, can bring order out of chaos, and in doing so, fulfill the highest human function. Not a visionary, but with a strong sense of reality. A reproach to those who feel that a single individual can never stand up to the march of history. A reproach to those who feel that a single individual can never stand up to the march of history. An embodiment of the past who can console the present and provide hope for the future. Thank you.